Welcome back, baseball fans. The 1979-82 Fall League Draft. We have the 5th through 8th rounds of the draft done, meaning the 8 rounds of the draft are complete, but the league is certainly not ready to go, as the token round will soon follow. So we have all player slots filled up in the 8 rounds of the draft. So you're thinking, oh, that means we're done with the proper number of players. We start with 384, we draft 256, and that means we should be at 640. Well, that's not really the case, because we talked about guys who get improved. And when we look at the guys who get improved and factor that aspect in, you'll see the grand total. This is the final record here of players in the league. 620. 620 players are ready to go. That means there are 20 open spots on rosters. That means 20 times teams elected to improve a player instead of drafting somebody. And it became very popular in this draft as this notion was explored more than normally. Normally we get between 8 and 12, maybe, 6 and 12 players tops. 7 some years. 20. I like to use the fall league to experiment too. And then I learn from it, and sometimes I apply the good results to the summer league, which to me has much more importance based on schedule and length of time spent and trying to adhere to some sort of Major League Baseball chronology as well. So I like to have some fun and experimentation with the fall league, and so this 20 open spots that the token round will distribute, and even more to add to the craziness of this all, when we look at the token round results, normally in the token round, the top team might have 7 tokens and the bottom team might have 3, somewhere in there. Because you start with 5, you make a bunch of trades, you go +1, -1. We had 3 teams end up with 8, Arizona, 8 with Florida, and 8 with Cleveland. And not only that, we ended up, believe it or not, we had California with 1. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, the New York Yankees have 0. Is that surprising? They spent all their money. And they got a lot of great players. But they have no money left. They used up all 5 tokens already. That translates to meaning that they would have to wait until everybody has filled up their rosters and it's opening day, and the Yankees, if they want to make any more changes, they'd have to do it on opening day. That's how dire that 0 token is. But before we go to token analysis, let's just take a look at what happened in the second day of the draft in the picks 5 through 8. We'll kind of just skip through teams here. I don't want to take a lot of time with these later round picks. But starting, we'll look at a highlight of the last 4 for each team, beginning with Toronto. Really, the best player here is continuing Roy Howell's career. They brought Lloyd Moseby on in '82, knowing he's not really ready. He's a .236 hitter with a .664 OPS, but they'll probably improve him next year to his '83 card. We saw the Dodgers do this when they brought in '71 Steve Garvey as a third baseman. It's .227, and the next year they bumped him up to his MVP card in 1974. So that's probably what they'll do with Moseby. Let's see, the White Sox, and therefore they brought in Lamar Hoyt. We know he does big things in '83. You could argue statistically he may have been better in '82 when the White Sox weren't. So they went with the '82 card as a 19-game winner versus waiting for that 24-win card of '83. Arizona's nothing special here. Bringing Chris Spire back for a nice long... Actually, Chris Spire will play with Arizona longer than any of the traditional Major League teams he played for. Ohio players, oh boy, they improved Joaquin Andujar to a World Series '82 appearance. That was a smart move. The Padres bring Tony Gwynn in the league as a .289 hitter in '82, but that's fine. Again, he's better than Lloyd Moseby coming into the league, and most certainly Gwynn will be bumped up the following year. The Cardinals, You know, these are some interesting moves. I like the collective group here. Dave Rucker is a decent lefty setup guy. John Martin's a decent lefty starter 7. Ken Maka is a 290 hitter who can play catcher and the corner infield positions. He lasted way too long in this draft. And of course, Jerry Martin's best year when he hit 19 home runs. So that collective group of Cardinals is pretty good for the second part of the draft. Oakland, nothing flashy at all there. Keith Drumwright's a 291 hitting left-handed second baseman on a team that doesn't have a lot of lefties, so that's good. The Mets, they used the second part of the draft to not really go to new players, but keepers Doug Bear, who they acquired, Kevin Cobell, they reacquired him. They found Junior Kennedy on waivers, and they improved Pete Falcone to arguably his best year. So they kind of went with the proven. You don't see any new players on the Mets. These are all guys who are in the league in the 78, 79, 80, 81 season. The same 8 players from different years. Colorado Rockies. Ron Reed has his best year at age 39. Terry Kennedy hits 300 at age 25. Bob Sykes and Rick Matula. And the Colorado doesn't value pitching very much. Matula's a starter 7, as is Bob Sykes, and that's the reason why they're there. And they're 25. They of course, don't get much better in the 80s. Boston, they had made... Between bringing back Dennis Eckersley and Bob Stanley, they've brought Bob Ojeda's 81 card and Wade Boggs' 82 card into the league. That is, for Boston, my goodness. So transitioning from the 70s to the 80s is working out nicely in a draft where they also kept Jim Rice and Carlton Fisk. Boston doing Boston things. Here was a very expensive acquisition, and it's like a what? So the Giants wanted a left-handed hitting catcher really bad in 82, apparently really bad. And they saw Ernie Witt was out there. And Ernie Witt's got a pretty nice year. A 261 hitter with some power, 440 slugging, 758 OPS. He actually gets even better in the 80s. And they get him from Toronto because Toronto still has Rick Cerrone, if you recall. Rick Cerrone went to the Yankees, but in this replay, he's going to stick around in Toronto with that -4 arm 2 more years. So the Giants say, we want Ernie Witt. You got Cerrone. Why don't you trade us the rights to Ernie Witt? And they demanded 2 draft tokens. Let's take a look at this. This transaction's way out here. Here it is. 2 draft tokens for Ernie Witt. That's the number we've reserved for Frank Robinson, Willie Mays, Pete Rose, Rich Gossage. Is there another $2 token player in here somewhere? Rod Carew. But because it was late in the draft, and that was a kind of a fun move. Giants probably wasted 2 tokens on that, and Toronto needs all the help they can get. So, look, the Giants got a good player. He's a good left-handed pull-hitting catcher. Giants are doing pretty good, and they got Steve Yeager, the other catcher, against left-handed pitching. So they got some pop from their catchers, believe it or not. The Reds, they brought Lee May back. Started with he was with the Mets, with the Reds in 69 and 70, 72, I believe, as well. Maybe not 72, but he's back now. It was 82 card hitting 308. Maybe they should bring back Tony Perez, because I think he's still out there. The Rangers, Wally Backman's got a nice on-base percentage, and Doc Medich has a nice card. Florida Marlins, just to confuse everybody on planet Earth, they drafted 2 Eddie outfielders, Eddie Milner and Eddie Miller. Now, that's not going to confuse me. Eddie Milner played for the Reds. Eddie Miller played for Atlanta. The Twins, nothing special. They got Mickey Hatcher into the league. But actually, that's another futures pick. Hatcher will have better years in 83 and 84. Seattle was a team that let a couple keepers go. They left keeper shortstop Frank Tavares out there, and went and got Luis Aguayo and Mario Mendoza. They like those dudes better. So that was a slap in the face. And instead of having a right-handed Tony Perez, they went with left-handed Gene Richards, who the Padres let go. So Seattle did a lot of experimentation with this draft. Got some young players. It's going to be fun to see this new Seattle team in action. It's a lot of new parts. Astros are trying to accelerate the Bill Duran and the middle infield. Bill Duran and quality play out of Dickie Thon. They also brought Dave Smith into the bullpen. So they're ready. They're ready to compete for that West with the Dodgers. Let's see, the Tigers. Oh, they improved Jack Morris so they can pitch. They can get him to a starter 9. So he's a starter 9. Whitaker's got his best year in the timeline. So they hope that will get them up in that division. The Phillies, nothing special. They added lefty Ray Searage, who's pretty good, and Mickey Klutz is a good utility hitting infielder. Where you've got Boa and we got a switch hitter Boa and a lefty Rob Wolfong. Mickey Klutz is a right-handed hitting middle infielder, and he's got some power. So it's a nice compliment. You're always looking to compliment in this when you only have a 20-man roster. Expos had a really nice draft. They look like they're ready to compete finally for the division. You know, they added Gullickson, Al Oliver, of course Steve Rogers. They got a very talented team, 79-82. The Cubs did something pretty clever in this draft by taking Rick Waite, the lefty starter who can pitch on 3 days rest, and as soon as he was taken, there was a big vacuum behind him, as there was no other left-handed pitchers who can pitch on 3 days rest for like 2 rounds in the draft, and the other teams were left to scramble. And they're like, boy, I wish you could have had Rick Waite, a guy with a 4.44 ERA. It's kind of funny, but yeah. He started a run on left-handed pitchers. Milwaukee's decided to cash in Robin Yount and Molitor and get their 82 cards when they went to the World Series. Meaning that they don't mind that they only have 18 guys on the roster now. They feel they can find any players from the years from 80 and 79 to replace those Yount and Molitor cards. They don't care. They can win this thing with an 18-man roster. That's very confident. Vegas just took what other teams didn't want. Paul Splittorff was a keeper, but Seattle just ignored him and didn't want to keep him, and they lose the rights, and Vegas says, well, we'll take Splittorff. Larry Christensen was on waivers. We'll take Larry Christensen. They got 2 guys who can pitch on 3 days rest added to that Las Vegas pitching staff. That's pretty clever. Yankees did some nice stuff. Lou Piniella, who they put on waivers, they sat out on waivers too long. You knew the Yankees were going to call him up. It was basically, it was one of those handshake deals. I said, Lou, we're putting you on waivers, but we are going to draft you if you don't get a call. Don't worry about it. So not only did they bring Lou Piniella back, they bring him back in 82, and he's hitting 307. Typical Lou Piniella year. A 307 year, but only a 448 slugging. Cleveland added new guys. Their keepers were all in the top 4 picks. So their nucleus is very, very talented. Then they had to go outside and find 4 guys, and all 4 guys are interesting. Rod Scurry's a lefty setup guy. Alan Bannister actually was a Cleveland Indian. He'll platoon with Kuiper at second. They found 2 guys who could pitch on 3 days rest. Brian Kingman from Oakland. By the way, Oakland had 5 guys who could pitch on 3 days rest in 1980. Of course, that doesn't make any sense because you only need 4 at the most. So one of the guys is a waste. That's because Billy Martin overworked that team. They didn't pitch on 3 days rest. They pitched on 4 days rest, but they all threw 200 innings because they didn't go to the bullpen. But Brian Kingman is here, and then Rick Wortham trying to disprove a 4.90 ERA in 79 and think, oh, he's better than that. Remember I told you about Rick Waite earlier? That's why Rick Wortham is here, 4.90. Yeah. Portland. Jim Barr has new life in 82 as a reliever after being a starter in the 70s. Joe Pittman is a nice split. A one-way player. The Pirates decided to make Omar Moreno Instead of being a 1E16 in center field, he's now a 1E2 in center field. That should really help that pitching staff. Going from an automatic error to an automatic out in center field. Kansas City, just keeping the machine rolling. They have the best record in the American League, and they decided just to maintain. They kept Otis, Gurra, Frank White, Yule Washington. They brought back Jim Wolford, played for them in the mid-'70s. Mike Jones, a young lefty. And I've got a salty Pedro Bourbon. Age, he can't possibly be 32 years old. He's probably 42 years old. Anyway, they brought Pedro Bourbon in as a crafty right-hander who gets lefties out. Atlanta Braves, kind of a fun. So check this out. So in the last round, in the 8th round of the draft, Atlanta didn't have any catchers. They have 2 roster spots. They got no catchers. So they decided to be smart here, and they took Mike O'Berry because against lefties, he's got homers of 1.5 and 1.6, and he's a 0-arm catcher. So that's your default. So they took the backup catcher first, and now in the token round of the draft, they can farm around and find anybody to be the catcher versus right-handed pitching. He can be a lefty, he can be a righty, he can have a +2 arm. It's not going to matter. Baltimore, just doing Baltimore stuff, bringing the old guard back. Mark Belanger. They got Benny Ayala, DH versus lefties, and Pat Kelly, DH versus righties. So they just found old Baltimore players. California, I'm not crazy about their pitching staff, and that might be how the Angels roll. Devastating offense and just a so-so pitching staff. Nobody with an ERA below 3. This Danny Boone card is 284, but he's got a whip of $1.33. Lots of doubles in that card. Very questionable. Dodgers in great shape. Great shape. They brought in speed with Rudy Law. Rick Honeycutt's the new lefty replacing Jim Umbarger. They bring in Dave Stewart at age 25. They'll have him for, 3 years, and then he'll go into the rest of his career. He goes to Texas, he goes to Oakland, Toronto. We know the Dave Stewart story. So that's how those rounds ended. And like I said, we're in the token round of the draft now. Let's go look at the available players. 620 guys are in the league now. I got 620 Strat-O-Matic cards in the carryover league. We need 20 more, all to be taken from the token round of the draft. Available players, of course, if you still want to improve a guy, you can, but it's pointless at this point, really. If you improve a guy, then you got to find another guy. You're trying to add players to your roster, not keep the same quantity, but teams can still do it. They can still, consider those options. And then you have, these are the keepers that were not taken. So we talked Tony Perez and Tavares, both Seattle. And Seattle just didn't draft them. They just found that they weren't crazy about him. They made him a keeper, and they thought they found better guys in the draft. So I expect Tony Perez to get picked up now. Any of his 4 years. But the year to take is probably 1980. With Boston, that's the best of the years. 25 homers, 105 RBIs, a 275 batting average, 786 OPS. No reason for that card not to be in the league. So anybody looking for a 1980 player should think about getting Tony Perez. Frank Tavares has a couple of nice years, but in 1980, it's 279 as an ace stealer, 3 at short. Geronimo's got 4 cards to look at, but really 82 with Kansas City. He's got a 471 slugging and a 776 OPS. And Brian Esselstyn has a couple cards here. He hits 284 in 1980. The retired list of players is just that. Some of these guys got picked, if you're wondering. Any of these red lines here? Mike Phillips was pulled out of retirement. John D'Acquisto. Reggie Cleveland. Jim Cott. Darrell Jackson, that's 5. Bob Sykes is 6. Jim Wright is 7. 7 guys. So 7 players got pulled out of retirement. Think about that. Those 7 players got pulled out of retirement while those 4 keepers were ignored. Then we still have the waivered players. On this waivered player list, we got Don Stanhouse sitting out here. He was Baltimore's closer in 1979 that went to the World Series. He's just on the street waiting for a call. Orioles didn't want him, and nobody else wants him. So somebody can go get a closer with 26 saves if you need it. He's just sitting there waiting for the phone to ring. Louis Tiant's out there. You know, John Montefusco still has some juice left in him. He's got 4 years to consider here. Dick Ruthven's got 4 years. A-Rod's just a defensive third baseman by this point. Enos Cabell has 4 years, but really he's just kind of meh. He doesn't get good until 83, 84 when he's with Detroit. Mike Torres is going through a rough period here with Boston. Pitching to Fenway, his stats are pretty bad. Here's a shortstop. Craig Reynolds, a 3 shortstop, who bats left-handed. Somebody's got to pick him up. How about Greg the Bull Luzinski? He went from the Phillies to the White Sox. He had a 228 year in there, but his other years are good. He had a 292 year with the White Sox, and he had 18, 19 home runs. Problem is he doesn't have a position. He's a DH only, and that hurts his value a little bit. And outside of that, no more famous guys to consider. Bobby Valentine's got a really cool 79 card where he can play every position, including catcher, and there's a 742 OPS. That card should get into the league, just as a utility player. He's probably the best utility player available. Someone's going to want that. Then after you get to that, these are all the remaining, these guys here, all the remaining hitters of 1979. This is their last chance. Starting, these are sorted by batting average. The first player by batting average not taken yet is Barry Bonnell. It's not necessarily his last chance because he still plays baseball in 80, 81, 82, and 83, etc. But it's the last chance with that 79 card. He actually has a very nice 1983, does Barry Bonnell, with Toronto, I believe. And the pitchers, led by Bill Bonham. Bill Bonham's got a 3.79 ERA in 175 innings with the Reds. He's just sitting out there with his 79 card. And then after that, you get to the 1980 guys. And once you get to this row here, 1980 and beyond, these cards will be in here at least next year, and then the 81 and 82 for the following years. And then, of course, you end up with your undrafted 300 wrote-in players. And so the 2560 that we start with, once you start deleting cards that you've already drafted into the league, and you're down at 2076. So that just makes it easy to look at players when you delete the rows of players who are already in the league in a different year. So once again, the next part of the draft is the token round of the draft. We talked about Arizona having 8. And then it's pretty simple how you do this. And it's a lot of fun too. And that'll be the next video we do. We have a chart down here, starting in this row. The first pick in the token round, with a team that drafted 3rd in this draft, which is Arizona, because they have 8 tokens, they get the first pick. And then the second token is the next team who has 8, which is Florida, who drafted 14th. And then Cleveland, who has 8, who drafted 25th. After the 8s come the 7s. Toronto has 7, so they go to the top of the list, but then you see Arizona again. So Arizona was at 8, now they're at 7. So Arizona gets the 1st and 5th choices in this draft. Let's look down here at the 6. Arizona has the 1st, 5th, and 16th picks. Let's go down to 5. Here's Arizona again. 1st, 5th, 16th, and 27th picks in the token round belong to Arizona. And at the other end of the spectrum, way down here, the New York Yankees, once everybody else is out of tokens, the Yankees can get the 192nd, 190th, 188th, 184th. Again, there's like nobody is any good left. And 178th. If you're wondering, a lot of times teams will simply pass. Let's see if I can find an instance of a year ago. So going back a year ago, Oakland started with 7. When a team passes, they pass for good. That means that they've looked at their 20-man roster and they said, I'm ready for opening day. I'm going to pass. And that's what happens. So you get a lot of teams who pass, and then you see more passes, and then once you get to passes, you finally get the teams who still don't have 20-man rosters finally getting players. And there you go. So these 2 teams, Milwaukee and Ohio, simply had just 3 tokens. And you see there's this huge gap from here. And all these teams passed. They got their players. Everybody had passed by that point. So that's sort of where the Yankees will be picking in this particular example. So that's the next part of the draft, the token round of the draft. That'll be the next video. That should be a lot of fun this year because of the 20 players. We have 620. 20 players need to be added in the token round of the draft. And so it's normally about a round and a half. I made it 192 picks, but it won't be that many. Most of this will be passes, but I have to make the list this long in case the Yankees want to take somebody, you know, with their -5th, -4th, or their -3rd token. And it really doesn't matter because once you get down to the bare bones like that, you're just signing guys off the street. So there's no order about it. So a lot of times what I'll do is when I get to a opening day for every team and I get to that first game, the last thing I will do is I'll go back one more time and just double check and see if there's anybody that can help the team before the game starts. Kind of a taxi squad. So that's it tonight for the 79-82 second half of the draft, rounds 5 through 8, preparing for the token round of the draft. And that'll be a fun video that I'll produce next. It's a great amount of fun doing this, folks, and I hope you're enjoying this. We'll see you next time.